So last time I tried to spell out what we call shared intentionality, following Searle and Bratman and others, and the way that humans participate in many different kinds of activities embodying shared intentionality, cooperative problem solving, and general coordination of their social lives, and that apes are much more competitive and or individualistic when they engage in group activities. So nobody asked me a question about ape cooperative hunting, group hunting, but in the group hunting, in our analysis, essentially the apes are still behaving individualistically, even though their behavior serves to surround the monkey. Each ape is doing what's best for himself. So the first one chases the monkey, the second one heads it off, the other one goes over here, and the other one waits on the ground and hopes the monkey will come down. So their behavior serves to surround the monkey, but they aren't operating with a shared goal, and they don't have coordinated roles in any sense of a shared activity. And that's the interpretation, at least. Now, in the domain of communication, what happens is I tried to argue that there were two essential things that were cooperative about human communication that were probably missing in ape communication. One of them is what I call the joint attentional frame, or the common ground, mutual knowledge, whatever you want to call it, that sets the framework. So that I started out by saying pointing means nothing. It only means something if we have some shared experience that is going to ground that and help you to figure out what it is I want you to think or to do. So in addition to, and that joint attentional frame is an embodiment of shared intentionality in the sense that it's mutual. We both know that we both know that we are attending to the same thing at the same time. Then secondly, in addition to the joint attentional frame, we have the actual communicative act itself, which has at least 3 layers of intentionality. There are more if you talk about individual motives, but just at the level of communication, and this is following fairly closely the relevance approach, although we may disagree on some details. But at the sort of top layer, the motive, why I'm communicating, I have motives like a request, or these are speech acty kinds of things. I'm requesting something from you, I'm informing you of something you don't know, or I'm just sharing attention with you for just the pleasure of sharing. And those motivations all can be reduced to helping and sharing. And so I think human cooperative communication is about helping, that is, I'm informing you of something that you need to know, or requesting help from you, that's an imperative or request, or just sharing. And then all other kinds of communication, so that's the vast majority of what we do, helping and sharing, but there are these specialty motives like apologizing and greeting and thanking, which have special situations to which they're appropriate, and those are your classic sort of performative speech acts and stuff. But the main, what we're doing most of the time is informing one another of things, requesting things from one another, and sharing. So the social intention is about the motives. On the other end, the referential intentions are simply about me getting your attention on something I want it on. So I want your attention on the chair, and I can get your attention on the chair. That's not telling you what I intend in general, but that's a subcomponent of what I'm doing. And then, of course, the communicative intention, following Sperber and Wilson, the communicative intention that I'm signaling to you that I want you to know that I'm attempting to communicate. That's one way of saying it. There are other ways of saying it. So I want you to know that I'm attempting to communicate so that you will then seek relevance of the chair. So when I'm pointing to the chair and you know that I'm going to some effort to get your attention to the chair, it's mutually manifest that I'm trying to direct your attention to the chair, then you will seek relevance as to why I am pointing to the chair and perhaps make the inference that I want you to move it, or I want you to sit in it, or whatever it might be, or I just want you to know it's there for other reason. So that's all fundamentally cooperative. Motives of helping and sharing, joint attentional frame, framing everything, and a communicative intention, which is based on mutual manifestness, mutual knowledge, or shared attention of the communicative act being in the public space between us, which, as I also argued, when the communicative act is in the public space, then you can't ignore it. If I say something to you or point for you, you can act like you don't see it, and then you're okay. But if we mutually acknowledge that you saw the communicative act and you don't respond, then if you do that enough to enough people, we're going to end up putting you in the insane asylum because you're not responding to communicative acts from people, and therefore something is very wrong with you. So there creates this public, putting it in the public space creates a certain set of expectations and or obligations. And then the evolution of cooperative communication, I just tried to point out ways that each of these different sort of motives of requesting and informing and sharing, that each of them you could analyze from the point of view of benefits both to communicator and audience, and the benefits to communicator and audience basically in terms of fairly standard things like indirect reciprocity and reputation and things like that. And then I tried to trace ape attention getters, that is, banging or something, trying to get your attention on me as a precondition for communication, that with shared intentionality, those could evolve into something like triadic deictic pointing. So not getting your attention on me, but getting your attention on something else. And the ape intention movements, things where I'm actually getting ready to hit you or something and to start play, and I'm doing this, could eventually involve, through shared intentionality, into things like characterizing gestures, where I tell you to do this or do that, which requires the same kind of shared frame. I actually didn't talk about characterizing gestures as much as I'd like to have last time because of time problems, and I'll make up for that to some degree today. So where we are today is, I want to talk about the ontogeny of pointing in human ontogeny. And the basic argument that I'm going to make to you is that this structure that I just outlined and reviewed of cooperative communication is present in human infants' earliest pointing before language. I alluded to the argument yesterday that someone might say, the kind of examples that I gave last time, and of adults pointing in these very complex ways, someone might say, well, yes, but those are language-using creatures who are now pointing for all these complex communicative functions, but that it's because they're language-using creatures that somehow the pointing kind of draws off of that. And I'm going to try to convince you today that that's not true, because prelinguistic human infants already point with the basic structure of the joint attentional frame and the three layers of communicative intentions. The communicative intention, the three layers of intentionality, the communicative intention was going to require a little discussion about whether they really understand that and to what degree they understand that. They certainly don't understand it in the adult-like way, but I want to argue too that they understand the basics. Okay, so some people have argued that infant pointing, early pointing, is not the real thing. And as always, in science and philosophy, skeptical arguments quite often are bracing and make people actually do the work to show that it's there. So I'm going to try to give you a brief skeptical argument in just one moment, and then try to tell you about the evidence that we've hopefully amassed to argue against the skeptical conclusion. So early pointing at 12 months. For those of you who don't know much about infant development, for the first 9 months or so, infants' social lives is basically dyadic. That is, they are interacting with adults face-to-face, they are sharing smiles and vocalizing back and forth with the adult, and they can interact with objects as well, but they generally don't do triadic things, where they are integrating the interaction with someone else and an object. So they don't have joint attentional things where they're monitoring someone else's attention to an object. They don't imitate actions on objects where I'm monitoring your action toward the object. They don't social reference where some scary object comes and they check to see what the adult thinks about it. They don't point and show things before 9 months. So it's dyadic, you and me, face-to-face, has all kinds of rich things. I don't know how uniquely human it is. There's some questions about that. It's unclear how much apes do face-to-face stuff. It's unclear how much people in different cultures do face-to-face stuff. So I'm going to leave all that stuff aside and just say that the 9-month revolution, as I've called it in some places, my friend Philippe Rochat now talks about a 2-month revolution. He says, you have a revolution, I want a revolution. Okay, so my 9-month revolution, and it's following Colin Trevarthen, basically, but with a few added twists, is basically things turning triadic. That is, we're now doing all these things with interactions. Our social interactions are about objects, are mediated around objects. And from a long time back, from Jerome Bruner in particular, noted that this is the basic structure of human linguistic communication. You and I talking about a topic. All right, so, and so there's three things, and there's always these three things involved. The communicator, the audience, and the topic that we're discussing. And even, of course, in pointing, it's going to be you, me, and the thing I'm directing your attention to. So let's start then. We're going to talk about the joint attentional frame and then each of the three levels of intentionality in the communicative act itself. The joint attentional frame, as I argued to you about the chimps not understanding in the basic so-called object choice situation. So food is hidden in one of two buckets. The chimp knows the food is in one bucket. They know they only get one chance. And you point toward the bucket, and they just don't know where it is. And it's absolutely surprising. It's quite replicable. It's not a one-time finding. We've tried all kinds of things. And as I argued to you last time, they just don't seem to get it. And one interpretation of that, or one component of it is, as I argued last time, one component of it is that when the child is in the same setting, we have, for both chimps and children, we have a kind of a preset, we have a warm-up. And in the warm-up, I hide the toy, and then I show the child where it is. So they know that the script is, I hide it, you don't know where it is, you're looking for it, I help you find it. So what happens with children, you set up that script, you're the finder, I'm going to help you find it. And so once you've set up that script, now I hide it, you don't know where it is, I point, and the child knows right away where it is. 14 months of age, prelinguistic, or maybe one or two words. And we're now 12-month-olds. We think we're getting it with 12-month-olds, but it's not in the bank yet. So one interpretation is the child understands the joint activity, this joint game. We have a goal together that you find the toy. This is our joint goal, that you find the toy. You search, I help. All right? And if they understand that cooperative structure, then the pointing is trivial. Knowing what the pointing means is trivial, because I'm fulfilling my role. I'm just fulfilling my role in a different way. Before I tilted it over so you could see it, and now I point. But I'm doing the same thing. I'm just doing it a slightly different way. If you don't understand the structure, the cooperative structure of the game, then the point is meaningless, as it is for the chimps. So my first point is about the joint attentional frame is that young children do the object choice task from a young age, from 12 to 14 months. And so they seem to understand. One interpretation is they understand this frame. Now, in response to Dan's question-challenge yesterday, I came up with another, I reported another experiment in the question-answer period, so let me now do that a little more systematically. This is Liebal et al. In preparation. So it's in preparation, but the reliabilities are done and the statistics are done. Okay? So I feel very confident about it. So the setup is this. We have the child and the adult are playing with toys, and they start putting them away. So the adult takes the lead. We're putting away the toys. The child puts away at least one toy. The adult puts away some toys. And then the adult goes, All right? And there's a toy out in the middle of the room. It's a ring toy like this. And sure enough, the child goes and retrieves it and puts it away, because that's what we're doing. We're putting away toys. The point is meaningful to that shared activity, and so you get it and you put it away. Now you can shift the activity. This is fairly trivial, but you can shift the activity. We're now putting rings on a stack like this, and I put on a couple and the child puts on one, and then I go to the same exact toy, same exact place, and now, of course, and the basket where you put the toys away is in the same place, so the child can go retrieve the toy and has the same possibilities of coming back and putting it in the basket to put it away. I should have mentioned that the ring thing was there in the other condition as well. So everything's the same in the two conditions. The ring toy in front of me, the basket over here. Okay, when we're putting them away, the child ignores the ring thing, puts it in the basket. When we're stacking toys, puts it on there. So it's fairly trivial, I guess, but it does demonstrate that the context drives their interpretation of the pointing. But the key condition is a control condition where we're putting away the toys. We've been playing, we're putting them away, and then in walks another person who now points to the ring toy. So the child is in the putting away toys script, game, shared activity with me, but Elizabeth came in the room and pointed to the toy. Does the child egocentrically assume that's about putting toys away because that's what I'm interested in? Or does the child say, she didn't have any idea we're putting away toys. She was not a part of that script. She didn't even observe us putting away toys. So it means something else. And indeed, they take it to mean something else. Their most common thing is simply to look at the toy and look up at and smile, like as if she was pointing it out just to say, isn't that interesting, or here's a toy in the middle of the floor or something. Sometimes they go over and pick it up and hand it to her. That happens some. And sometimes they go over and they pick it up and just kind of examine it themselves and whatnot. And very seldom do they put it away in the basket. So this is my best evidence that children really are taking account that we have a shared frame, and if you weren't part of the shared frame, then your pointing is going to be interpreted from some other perspective and not from the frame that I myself was in with someone else. So Dan and I have had some discussions about this, and I'm guessing we'll probably have some more, but I take it that means that the shared frame is perhaps necessary. Dan has said it makes things easier, but it's not necessary. I'm going to try to push for necessary as far as I can. Okay, so that's the idea, and again, this is of course a shared frame, and this is definitely pre-linguistic if the 12-month-olds are doing it for sure. Now let's talk about production a little bit, and again, I have some observations. These are diary observations. This is table 2A on page 17. I have some diary observations. Now, this is another one of those cases. You've heard me at various points in these talks argue for experiments. But the truth is, really, I'm a methodological pluralist, and I think all methods are important. And in the case of pointing, almost all of the research that's been done on pointing has been either experimental or aimed at language, and there are very few observations of children's pointing in their natural context. Very few. And the ones with the adult last time that I gave you pointing in the natural context, I made those observations myself just in walking around town and on the plane and whatnot, because there are almost no observations of people pointing in their natural context. So that's a big gap. We need to know what people do in their real lives, and then we can try to think up clever experiments. But so here's a case. We had, I don't know why, but in our lab seems to be a quite fecund lab, and we have lots of babies of graduate students. And so we have 3 of them who are watching babies at various times over the last couple of years at the appropriate moments. And just look at some of these observations. These are diary observations, but these are all people who are a little bit trained in this direction. So they know what to look for, they know not to overinterpret, but they know what are the relevant parts of the observation. So I feel pretty good about the reliability of these. So very simple things. If you look just at the very top there, Yaron points to the window when he wants it open. That's just a general imperative kind of point. That's an everyday thing. A couple more down, Jaron points as Dad prepares to leave. So now he doesn't really want anything. He's not really even sharing attention, really. He's not informing. It might be informing, but okay, anyway, he's anticipating. Down near the bottom of, it's actually Yaron in German. He watches as Dad arranges a Christmas tree, and then when Grandpa enters, he points to the tree and gives a "oh" like this. Now, this is interesting because there's nothing new about the tree. Nothing in his experience directly has changed. But Grandpa comes in, and Grandpa hasn't experienced the tree. So it's not like, it happens quite often that you and the child will round the corner, and there's some interesting thing, and the child goes, "oh," but it's new for both of you. So it's not really diagnostic. The child could just be excited. But when it's old for the child, and you come in, and it's new for you, and he says, "look, the Christmas tree," then that's a pretty interesting observation of a child, again, below 14 months. All these observations are 14 and a half months or below. And then another interesting set, Yaron, on a number of occasions, bumps his head or falls, and as Mom picks him up and comforts him, he tends to point to the location, point to the floor, point to the chair where he hit his head. So these are, I mentioned this last time, displaced in time and space. He's pointing he's pointing in some sense to the past event. He's obviously pointing to a current location, but the significance of it is to point out that something happened there a moment ago. If you jump down to now Lisa, about halfway down on Lisa, she does the same thing at about the same age, 13 and a couple of weeks. So Lisa pulled down a heating lamp halfway off the wall. Mom reacted to it, freaked out or whatever, and put it back. And Dad came in later, and Lisa points to the heating lamp to try to say what some exciting thing happened with it previously. The one right above that, mom is looking for a missing refrigerator magnet, and it's nowhere to be seen. And Lisa points to the basket of fruit where the magnet is under the fruit. You can't see it. So again, she's pointing for a missing referent, in this case, hidden from view. And the next to the bottom one, I actually didn't fill this all out. Mom is bringing a chair. Lisa needs her chair at the she needs her high chair at the table. And there are two different observations. In one of them, Lisa's at the table, and she wants the high chair at the table, so she points to the high chair. So she's pointing to the object that needs to be brought to the location. On this occasion here, Lisa is next to the high chair, and mom starts to get it, and she points to the location where it goes. So basically, in both cases, she wants the same thing. She wants the high chair at the table. But depending on where she is and what mom is doing, the point is either to the chair, which needs to be brought, or if mom's already touching the chair, then it's to the location where she needs to take it. So within the frame, given what's, assuming what's given for mom, either the chair is given for mom or the location is given for mom, then we point to the new part to direct mom in both cases to get her to bring the chair to the table in both cases. Okay? So these, to my knowledge, are the first sort of observations of child's pointing in their everyday life. By the way, you look up at the top, I have like, get me that, look at that, pointing for the self. There are lots of observations of the classic variety. These are the interesting ones. I took out the most interesting ones. So these are not representative. These are cool ones that I thought, wow, when I saw them. So I'm not trying to say they're representative, but they happen on a regular basis for all the children. Every few days you get one of these really interesting ones where it's displaced in space and time, or it's got some twist to it that makes it interesting. You need diary observations for this because you bring them in the lab for an hour every few weeks. You're just not, you wouldn't catch any of these. So you need continuous observations. And so for those of you who know, I actually did a diary study for my dissertation. So I'm a big proponent of that, as well as experiments. Okay, so the joint attentional frame, I wouldn't say that any of what I've reported to you is absolutely knockdown argument that children understand the joint attentional frame within which things happen, the shared activity at the same level as adults do. But I would say all of this is pretty suggestive that children understand the context and that point differently in different contexts, when people know things differently, when different aspects of the situation are shared, even when something's missing or something's displaced in time. So even though these are obviously simpler situations than the ones that I talked to you last time about with the adults, so adults are pointing to the bathroom to ask if you're waiting in line for the bathroom, or they're pointing to tell you to move up in line and all that, they're obviously more complicated. Children, I can't imagine a 14-month-old in the airplane pointing to me to ask if I'm waiting in line for the bathroom, because the 14-month-old doesn't know enough about waiting in line in airplane bathrooms and stuff for that context to make sense. But of the kind of everyday contexts that they participate in, they seem to be quite flexible in being able to communicate to others about that, depending both on the nature of the shared context and on the nature of what the other person knows and is focused on in that context. Okay, now let's talk about the three layers of intentions. And I'm going to do these in kind of a different order. So if you'll recall from last time, we sort of have the social intention, which is the motive, like a request or whatever. And then the communicative intention is that I want us to know together about my social motive. And then the referential intention is the bottom. The referential intention is just me getting your attention on the chair, for example. But I'm going to start with the referential intention. I'm going to start at the bottom. And the reason is because the challenge, the skeptical challenge that I wanted to start with is made by Chris Moore. And Chris Moore makes the following observation, that it's quite often the case that when infants, young infants, 12, 13, 14 months, when they point to something, they point to things that the adult is already looking at. And he has an experiment where that's true. So the adult is already looking at something, and the child points anyway. So his explanation was, children aren't really trying to direct your attention to something. They just want you to go, oh, or something. They want to get some reaction out of you. They want some emotional response. And they don't really understand that you don't know about that chair over there. You aren't attending to it. And they want to get you to attend to it. He thinks that interpretation is wrong. He thinks you're just trying to get some interesting response out of you, and they've learned that this does it. It's a kind of a behavioristic kind of analysis. So I don't believe that, and here are some things that we've done. Liskovsky et al., he's a postdoc in my department, we did a study with 12-month-olds, and I'm going to tell you about all the conditions here, and I'm going to use this study in a couple of times to make a couple of different points. So let me explain the study, and we have other studies with the same methodology, and so this one is going to set everything up. The basic idea is this. We're going to elicit pointing from 12-month-olds. This is relatively easy to do. So generally, what we do following George Butterworth's paradigms is I'm standing here, the infant's across from me like this, and we have little puppets and things that start jiggling around in the background. And the infant's over here where you are, and they just, ooh, okay, and they tend to point to the puppet. This is going to be generally a declarative, expressive, sharing kind of motive, just like, ooh, isn't that cool? They don't want it particularly, or in most cases, and whatever. Now, the paradigm is this. We elicit pointing, and then we react in various ways, and then we look at the child's reaction to our reaction. So it's kind of an ethno-methodology, if you will. Okay? We're going to react to him a certain way, and then we're going to see if he likes that reaction or not. The general logic is, if you do what he wanted, if you do what the infant wanted, then they should be happy, and they point, you do what they want, fine, everything's cool. If they point and you're not giving the right reaction, you're not giving the one that is their goal, the one they want you to do, then they'll make some adjustment or do something to try to get you to do what they want. So that's the logic of all the experiments. So in this case, the Liskovsky et al. 2004, we elicit the pointing from the infant, and then we do one of four things, each one tied to a different hypothesis. If your hypothesis is that what infants are doing when they are pointing like that is they want, this is what your mother would say. If you ask your mother, what's the infant doing? She would say, they want you to look at the toy. Right? So we try that. Infant goes, ooh, and it points to it, and we go. And guess what? They don't like that very much. Okay? So it's not just that they want you to look at the toy. Okay? Chris Moore says they want you to get a good reaction out of you. So in that case, we don't reference the puppet at all, and we just go, yeah, whoa, cool, yeah, oh, you're so cute, wow, okay. No, okay, they don't like that either. And when I say don't like it, they either continue pointing, they point again. When you don't look at the thing, they tend to point, and then you're just looking at them, and they go like this again. And when you just look at this, and you don't reference them again, they kind of point, and they, like, all right. All the energy is gone from the situation. And of course, we have a control condition where you do nothing. And of course, they hate that. That is, you don't get excited, you don't look at it. But what they do, what they like, is exactly what you would do naturally. You don't have to think about this. If a 12-month-old today did that kind of pointing for you, what you would do is you would go, yeah, yeah, cool, And so you would reference them, and you'd reference what they wanted you to look at, and you would make a comment back to them. Okay? Because they want to share their enthusiasm for this puppet, and you need to share it with them. So the explanation for Chris Moore's challenge is infants sometimes point to things you're already looking at because declarative, expressive pointing has two functions, as it were. One is they want to share attention to the puppet. They want you to look at it. But the other is they want to share emotions about it. They want to share their excitement. So if you're looking at it, but you're not excited enough, then they keep pointing and expressing their excitement. So they sometimes look to things, point to things you're already looking at, but that's because you haven't given them the right emotional response yet. So they're persisting so that you will share their enthusiasm. Okay? So that paradigm is a one that set up some other studies, and the one right below, Liskovsky et al. Submitted, again, reliability and statistics completed. What Ulf did was we had the same basic setup, and then we had a target that wasn't the real target. So this time they weren't puppets. They were just two interesting looking things, and one boring thing and one sort of interesting thing. There's a kind of a wall here. The infant points to the interesting thing, and Ulf turns around and finds the other thing and says, oh, that's interesting, great, wow. But it's the wrong referent. It's not the one the child intended. Right? And so in that case, they try to repair the message. At 12 months old, they try to repair the message. They point again, more than we have the various control conditions where and so obviously when he actually identifies the right target, then they tend to do one long point, and when you identify the wrong target, they tend to do like this. And over time, we do like 8 trials for the kids. If you've identified the right target, they keep pointing for you. If you keep identifying the wrong target, they kind of give up after some point and they stop pointing. Okay, so in that case then, we actually manipulated specifically, did you get the right target or not? And they care whether you got the right target or not. I should also say, Liskowski et al. Submitted B, also on here, is absent reference. Now I gave you some examples of absent reference from the natural observations, but we also have an experimental demonstration of absent reference, and one of the things that he noticed in these early studies is that quite often after the puppet disappears, they point back to the location where it used to be. Right? And it doesn't seem like they want it to happen again. It seems like they're directing you, there's the place where something interesting happened. And I think that the natural observations that I told you before about pointing to where something disastrous happened a moment before, or pointing to the place where Dad's getting ready to leave out the door, I think those make that interpretation fairly plausible, that they're pointing where the puppet used to be dancing around is a way of indicating to you an event that happened in the past, or possibly hopeful anticipation that it will be happening there in the future. It doesn't look like a request, make it happen, and in fact the adult doesn't seem to have anything to do with the puppet. The puppet is spontaneously popping there, so I don't think they're telling the adult to make it happen. It's possible, but I don't think so. I think, again, absent reference is part of the argument of Chris Moore is that they're not directing your attention to something you don't know about, because the pointing is not about manipulating mental states at all. And we think it is, because we think the target matters. They know whether you're attending to it or not. And when you have absent reference, it really reinforces that this is about mental things, because now I'm not directing your attention to something you can even see. So I'm essentially trying to make you think about something that used to be there, or think about something that's going to be there. So I think the absent reference really reinforces the idea that it really is about mental things that they are communicating. They're communicating on a mental level and not just about behavioristically defined things. Okay, now, so that's the referential intention. They really do want you to focus on a specific referent. Now, that may have been something that you never doubted, but some people have doubted it, and so we thought it was important to document that they did. The reason people have doubted it is because they doubt that infants at 12 months of age understand attention or perception. So how could they be directing your attention or perception because they don't understand it yet? And we think there's lots of evidence that they do, and I'm going to come to some more of that later from other domains other than communication. But for now, I'll just say I think the evidence on the pointing is pretty good, that they do want you to, they're trying to direct your attention to something. Now, the motive or the social intention. We have expressives, informatives, and requestives. And so let me just say a little bit about each one of them, because I think they have all, those are the basic motives. There are these specialty motives, but those are the basic motives that I argued for last time. I argued that expressives are sharing, that informatives are basically I'm helping you, or I'm sharing information with you, or I'm helping you by giving you information you need, and requestives, obviously, I'm requesting help. So expressives. Now, you'll notice after each of these, I have a little italicized gloss. I want that we know that I want that we feel X together. Now, I'm sure some people will think that's crazy, that a 12-month-old has a structure like that. But I'm going to posit this kind of structure, and that's got the communicative intention embedded in it. The communicative intention is that I want us to know together that I want something. And that part, that argument will come later. But the reason I did it in terms of these primitives is if you look at each one of them, I want, we know, I want, we feel X. Informative, I want, we know, I want, you know X. I want, we know, I want, you do X for a request. Each of those elements, we have independent evidence from other domains, from experiments, that children understand these things to some degree. Now, the I, you, we, I'm not sure exactly what the right evidence for that is, but but certainly the psychological predicates of wanting and knowing and doing and feeling, I think we have external evidence for. So I didn't really go into the primitives so much last time, but I think that it's important when we try to give an interpretation of what children are doing. I think it bolsters your case significantly if you can provide independent evidence for your interpretation and if we can do that a little bit systematically, we can make the interpretation as precise as we can by doing it in a kind of a primitive language here, and then saying, okay, we need evidence for each of these independently if possible, and that will give us independent evidence that the interpretation is an accurate one. Okay, so expressives. Now I'm going to talk about the same study again because it basically shows the same, I just repeat what I said before. In that Liskowski 2004 study, what children want when they're pointing to the puppet and excited about it is they want you to go, yeah, okay. So they want you both to share attention and they want for you to comment on it and share. Another thing that happened in the second Liskowski et al. Submitted A, where I told you they found the wrong referent. So in that case, it was a 2x2. So John would like it. In one case, I told you he misidentified the referent, and the children didn't like that. In the other case, what he did, the child pointed excitedly to the puppet, and Ulf turned and identified the right puppet, identified the correct referent, and went, So I got the right target, but I didn't match your enthusiasm. All right? And we think that's one of the goals of the expressive. So if I come to you and I say, oh man, did you see that football game last night? Oh, did you see the latest Fellini movie? Right? You can do it. We do it all the time. But what I really want is I want for you to say, yeah, that was so cool, because I want you to share my enthusiasm. And that's what. And this is, I would say, this accounts for the majority of infant pointing. Really, is this? They just want to share this stuff with you. And so when you do that, when you just go, they deflate, and over trials, they quit pointing for you altogether. Because you're just really boring, or whatever the right word is. You're just not the right kind of partner. You don't give me any positive vibes at all. Okay? All right, so when you put those two together, infant declarative, expressive pointing, they want you to identify the specific referent, and they want you to match their attitude, if possible. Now, what we'd like to do, we're not sure how to do it, what we'd like to do is to elicit from children a negative attitude. So the infant goes, meh, or something, And then if you're excited, the prediction would be they wouldn't like that either, because what they want is they want you to match their attitude. So if I say, man, that was a boring game last night, and you might say, no, I thought it was an exciting game. It's okay, you can do it, of course, but it just somehow, what I want you to do is I want you to commune with me. I want you to commiserate with me that I spent a boring night last night, and you're right, me too. I was bored in front of my TV watching the football game also. Okay. So we think these experiments demonstrate that they both want to get your attention on something and they want you to share an attitude, a feeling with them. Now, second, informative pointing. Now, informative pointing, this study we called our sauna study because the idea came to me in the sauna because I was leaving the sauna after a workout. I was leaving the sauna, and one of the people in there pointed like this as I was headed to the door, and I had left my key, my locker key. I'd left it on the bench there. And I just thought to myself, as I was walking to the shower, I thought to myself, I wonder if a 12-month-old would inform you of something that you don't know just to help you, just when you don't know it. So I'm going to, sorry, I forgot about my little pictures here. One second. So I'm not far off. Okay, declarative, we got to take one little quick step back. The quick step back is back to the expressive declarative pointing, just so you can see, can you see that all right with the light? I don't know if we should dim the light, but it's probably okay. But if it's easy, fine. If it's not easy, don't worry about it. No, it's okay. That's good, yeah. Mm-hmm. That gets this off, yeah. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. This is your everyday sort of pointing thing. Okay, the infant stops. The infant doesn't really want it. It's not a request. The adult looks, and they're just sort of sharing attention to it. Now, just to show you that this motive, always in these cases, you could always argue that the child wants it in some way, that there's some requestive thing going on. The interpretation is never 100% certain. But I would say this is now not pointing but showing. I would challenge anyone to come up with a different interpretation of that. Okay, I mean, to me, that's just sharing, and I don't know what else you could call it. Right? Look, okay? And the child doesn't want you to, I mean, it's a boring block. The child doesn't want you to open it or do something with it. He's already got it in his hand, so he doesn't want it. What else could the child possibly be wanting? And of course, the fact that it accords with our intuitions, you know, this is what you do to your poor friends when you come back from your holiday and you say, look at my picture, look at me in front of the Eiffel Tower, okay? And they say, oh, cool, well, great, okay? This is just sharing. And you're just sharing, and so I'm claiming to you that many of children's early points, and this is not a radical proposal at all. This is, in some ways, this is what people have been saying for a long time. But what they really are doing is sharing emotions with you, and that's what they're doing here as well. Okay, now informing. Now this is Ulf with his study of informing, and this is Leskovsky et al. 2006. And the basic idea is this. What we're going to do is the adult is going to misplace things, or somehow they're doing some stuff. The adult's doing stuff. The child's just watching. They're not interacting. Okay? The child's just watching. The adult's stapling papers, writing, doing various adult things. All right? And then somehow the objects get displaced. He's interacted with two of them. He's done something with this, and he's done something with this. They've been touched equally, and then they're displaced. And the displacement occurs 4 different ways. But I'm just going to show you one of them. And then the adult comes back in, and for example, one of the things she was doing previously was stapling papers. And she comes back in with her papers, and now she looks for the stapler. She needs to staple, there's no stapler there, and we want to know if the infant will just tell her. There it is, there's a stapler. Okay, and so now what you'll see is the adult was there and the adult's gone. So the guy here is not the adult. The guy here is taking away the objects while she's gone and displacing them. And you'll see her come back in. So he leaves. The 2 objects are back in the far thing there. She's going to come in just 1 second with her papers. Watch the left panel. She comes in with her papers. She's ready to staple. Okay, she looks around. She can't find the stapler. She does this to show that she can't find the stapler. And now you can switch over and watch the child. This is a 12-month-old child. The child's going to hang around and does something a little funny here, turns around, looks at the camera, and then watch his eyes if you can when he does it. And gives a very nice little look. Now notice, okay, we did a number of interpretive things there. Notice the point is now gone. All right, so one question would be, does the infant want that stapler? Now, first of all, a priori, the stapler is not that interesting. The child hasn't been playing with it. But secondly, the child doesn't do anything that looks like a request. There's no leaning forward. We have another condition where it's something they want. It's a toy they need in front of them. They lean forward. They whine. Okay? In addition, if they point to it and they want it, when you pick it up, they should continue pointing and whining because you're only halfway there. You haven't given it to them yet. But they don't. When you pick it up, they stop. Because they've accomplished what they want, which is you saw where it is and you got it. Right? So they are really informing you of something that you don't know. So we think this depends on 2 things. They understand when you're ignorant, that is when you don't know where it is, knowledge ignorance, and we have other studies I'm going to tell you about later that are not about communication from another paradigm where we think that's true. And I also think the Onishi and Bayerjean and the Surian and Sperber studies show the same thing, if other things as well, but at least that. So they know that you are uninformed, that you don't know where the stapler is, and they're motivated to help. And we have other studies showing that when you drop things and are reaching for things, they help. So they know when you're ignorant, and they are motivated to help you by informing you of things you don't know. Right? And then we have a follow-up study, because the reviewers, so this is Leskovsky et al. In preparation. So this is, again, one with that's not submitted yet, but close. We have one of the reviewers said, the child just wants to see the stapling get going again. The stapling was fun to watch, and they just want you to crank it up again. So in this case, what we did was we had 2 equal objects. We stapled, and then we did these hole punching things. The Germans like these hole punching things to put away all your bureaucratic papers and stuff. So you staple it and you put the holes in them. So we staple the paper and we punch holes in it both. So both objects are equally associated with the paper. Now I leave, somebody puts them away, I come back with my paper, I could now want either one equally. So if I want to keep the activity going, it could be either one equally. But then what happened? Oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Somebody didn't put them away. I come back with my papers. I put one of them over here on purpose. I put it out of the way. And then while I'm putting this one away, this one falls away in some way. It actually, 3 different ways it moves. Okay, but I put this one away, and then I come back and I go, okay, and the idea is I don't want this one because I put it away, and I know it's over there. If I wanted it, I would just go get it. And this one is missing. All right? So in that case, again, they point to the one that you don't know it disappeared. So we think those 2 studies together demonstrate that children do engage in informative pointing, just like the person in the sauna did for me, that they know that you don't know where it is, and that they're helping you by informing you of its location. Okay, requestives. Now, requests or imperatives are very difficult to interpret, and Francois Reconati on the first day pointed this out, that when the infant is doing an imperative, it might not be anything high level like, I want you to consider my goal and perhaps help me get it. That would be a cooperative high level one, that I tell you what I want, I inform you what I want, and then I'm hoping that you will choose to cooperatively help me get what I want. That would be the cooperative high level imperative. The low level would be something much more, it could go very low level. The behavioristic level would be, I know when I do that, you get it for me, and I have no idea how that works. I have no idea how it happens. You can move up just a little bit of a level where I'm telling you what to do. I'm telling you to get it for me, and I'm in a kind of I'm ordering you to get it for me. And in fact, that's the way I interpreted what the chimps do when chimps go for humans. When there's food and chimps for humans, they go like this. And I think they're telling you somehow to look there, get it. And they're not saying, here's what I want, and I hope you'll help me get it. I pointed out that if this is a distinction that is hard for you to sort of grasp, that a lot of human requesting is indirect requests, right? So I say, do you think if it's not too much trouble, you possibly might think about if it's not getting me a Perrier? Or I just say, I'd like a Perrier. Now notice, I'd like a Perrier, you interpret that as a request, but actually, all I'm doing is reporting on my inner state. I'm saying, I would like one. And you could respond by saying, oh, good, or I would too. All right? But I'm reporting on my inner state, and then you're supposed to do something about it. I'm hoping that you'll do something about it. So a lot of indirect requests and politeness are basically, rather than me telling you what to do, this would be back in this, what we talked about last time about some of these things about reputation and all that sort of thing. I think a lot of politeness, not all of politeness, because a lot of politeness is due about power and hierarchy and stuff, but a lot of politeness is about me enabling you to be nice. So instead of me telling you, get it for me, in which case you just have to get it, what's in it for you? But if I say, boy, I sure would like one, and you get it, then you can display how nice you are. You can show me how nice you are by getting it, and I've allowed you to do that by being very indirect and not by ordering you to do it. So if I order you to do it, then you're just doing what I tell you to do, then you're a sucker, all right? You're a chump because you did what I told you to do for no reason. But if I say, boy, I sure would like one, and you get it, then you're a nice person. So by being indirect, I can enable you to show your niceness in a public domain. So the request, I don't have any great arguments for you that this is one of our major research directions. I say major directions, we have 0 studies going on, but this is one of our major challenges that we're thinking about now, is ways of distinguishing different kinds of requests, because infants start requesting things very, very early. It depends on, they're crying from the day they are born, so they're in some sense requesting help from adults from the day they're born, but the question is how they understand those requests, how they understand how they work, and we'd like to, it would be consistent with our approach if there was some change at around 12 months where before that they were doing it more in a demanding way, and from 12 months they're doing it in a more cooperative way. But we have, at the moment, I have really no evidence for that. I'm just putting out the hypothesis. I did mention last time that there is a study with 24-month-olds and 30-month-olds done by Helen Shui and Ellen Markman, and a follow-up by a student with a it had some problems, so we're trying to fix those. But the basic idea that we're thinking of is the child requests something from you. So there are two objects. There's a really great one, a really great toy they really want, and like a piece of paper or something really boring. So the child always asks for the toy, or you wait till they ask for the toy. And then you can do one of four things. It's a 2x2. Either you understand them or not, correctly, yes or no, and they get what they want, yes or no. So the straightforward one, you understand them, they get what they want. Oh, you want the toy? Okay. The one where you understand them, but you don't give them that, you say, you want the toy? Sorry, you can't have it. Here's the paper. Okay, they're not very excited about that, obviously. You misunderstand them. You might say, you want the toy? Sorry, you want the paper? No, you can't have it. Here's the toy. So that's the interesting condition. You want the paper? No, you can't have it. Here's the toy. So you misunderstood them, but they got what they wanted anyway. And what these young kids from about 2 will do is quite often they'll repeat themselves because they want the message to be successfully communicated in addition to getting what they want. So they have these two layers. They want the toy, but they also want you to know that they want the toy and that they were communicating to you about wanting the toy. So anyway, we're thinking about situations like that where we try to pull apart the different layers of intentions that go on in making those kinds of requests. Okay, now these sort of what I call specialty motives, I'm trying to stay away from words like performatives because they carry so much baggage with them. These sort of specialty motives that children do from a pretty early age are things like greeting, children saying hi and bye. These are going to be linguistic for the most part. There's no pointing involved, and we're focused on pointing here, but I just want to mention them. Thanking. We train our children to say thank you, and they do at a very early age. And children say sorry quite often before 2 years as well. I have no idea how children understand these. I'm not even sure how adults understand them. But they are specialty sort of motives, and I think if we're going to give a full account of children's social motives in communicating, we really ought to be able to account for these kinds of things, because traditionally one of the things that marks them is that they don't really have reference. So a referent. So when I say thank you, what's the referent? Well, there's not really a clear referent. And I don't know, it just seems to me that one possible interpretation is that in this context, I'm feeling gratitude, and I want us to attend together to my gratitude. I want you to know that I'm trying to express to you my gratitude. So whether 12-month-olds have anything in that direction or not, I don't know. But they do this a lot, and they greet, they say hi and bye quite regularly, and that doesn't require much training. Of course, they have to see people greeting, but they say hi and bye quite easily. And so I don't know. Anyway, I just think that I just want to emphasize that I know there are other motives other than informing and requesting and expressing, sharing, and that would be these specialty motives. And each one need to be analyzed from the point of view of the communicator and the recipient and the balance of interests for each of them. Okay, so finally we come from the referential intention, the social intention. Now we come to the communicative intention. You'll notice on the handout I have after really ? All right, the communicative intention, I didn't get to elaborate on it too much last time, but the example in Sperber and Wilson, as I recall it, is the one where you can really see the communicative intention at work, is an example of what I call hidden authorship. I think that's not their term, that's our term. And so, for example, if you're at the dinner table at a party and you'd like some more wine, but for politeness reasons you don't want to request it directly, you have an empty glass and you sort of make sure that it's out there in the open, and you make sure that Dan sees your empty glass, and being the good host that he is, as he was last night, thank you very much, he comes over dutifully and fills your wine glass. So in that case, your intention, what they call the informative intention, is I want Dan to know that I want wine. But I don't want him to know that I want him to know. That is to say, if I went, okay, all right, all right, then not only do I want him to know that I want the wine, but I want him to know that I want him to know that. And and I actually say I want us to know together that I want him to know that, is my pull on it. So those are cases of hidden authorship where the normal case, this is what's paradoxical, and I think you guys have talked evolutionarily, it might be that the that the ostensive, the simple informing intention came first, that I just want you to know something. And then this communicative one gets laid on top of it. But acquisitionally, that's not what happens. Acquisitionally, at the beginning, it's all out in the open, and I'm making this request. And actually, what you have to do if you want to not express your communicative intention is you have to hide it. You have to make it not. You have to make it take it out of the public domain that I want you to know this. So, so infants do not do anything like this. They don't lie and deceive. They don't use sarcasm and irony. They don't do hidden authorship. So on that level, they don't have a full understanding of the communicative intention. But I still think they have some understanding about this thing being, about the communicative act being mutually manifest in the joint attentional frame in some way. So here, let me give you my best piece of evidence for it first. So that's halfway down, Benet et al. 2005. That's the basic object choice study. And it had a control condition. So that's the study where food hidden in one of two buckets, you simply point to it like this. And the way she pointed was like this. This arm over here, you'd be surprised how long we spend sitting around tables deciding which arm to point with and how far the point should go. But we script everything really, really carefully. So she points with this arm over here and points basically like this. And in the experimental condition, she goes like this and is telling the kid that the toy is in that bucket over there. Okay. In the control condition, she looks at her watch. Okay. Okay. So she goes like this. So the hand is basically the same, but she doesn't reference like this. Okay? So she just looks at the watch. So the superficial behavior is very similar, not the same, because they're not a referencing look, but that's the ostensive cue, and that's absent. And in that case, I think this is interesting. The frame of the game is set up. The child understands they're to look for it. It's not that they don't look. It's that they look randomly. Okay? So it's not that they don't know they're supposed to go look. They know that from the frame of the way we set up the game. But they don't understand this as a communicative act that's informing them where it is, because it doesn't have the cue saying this is for you. So we have taken to saying understanding that something is for me. And it's not clear exactly what for me means, but it's not only for me in the sense that I know it's directed to me, but it's a little more than that. It's the kind of Gergely and Chibra pedagogical stance. This is for me. This is for you. You're supposed to pay special attention. Now, jumping back up to the top on the handout there, the second entry there, where does this come from? I think children all the time, sorry about this. Usually I do a full PowerPoint, and so I'm going one by one. And here I'm on my outline, and so I keep forgetting to do my videos here. But I have to show you these videos. Sorry. So here's one more. I'm sorry. You have to push the pause button, please. And now we're going to go back in time and come right back. Okay. Here's another informative point. She's putting away these little blocks, and now watch the upper right. It's very quick, but the child's going to tell her the one she can't find very quickly. Okay? All right, let me just, I know that happened very quick. So watch the upper right. She's putting away the blocks. She can't find the last one. And he's going to point very quickly. He says, da. That's German is there. Da. Okay? So that was I'm just showing you that because, again, for me, showing it in a variety of situations always makes it much more compelling than if you see it in only one situation. So a very different situation, he does that. And these are going to be requestive points. These children are 18 months old. This is in the context of our cooperative games. But the kid is, the adult is, these are in the same experiment I showed you to demonstrate cooperation last time. But this time, in the context of a cooperative activity, the child is going to tell the adult what to do on her turn or his turn. And so this is a tube that pulls apart, and there's a toy inside, and the adult is going to be difficult. All right, and so the adult picks his up, and he's ready to go. The child has seen two adults do this briefly, but the adult's now being difficult, and now he stops altogether, and you'll see a couple of nice points here. Okay? And look to the face. You notice he looks to the face when he points. That's always important. And then he's ready to play again. Okay? And now this is one of my favorite videos. This was in a study of helping. But this is going to illustrate many points. This is going to, my whole talk is in this video. Okay, starts to be helping, and then it turns into cooperation, and there's some beautiful points in it. So it's everything, all in one. Okay, so this is a study of helping, and here comes Felix with the magazines, and he's putting them away. The child has no idea what's going on. The child's just observing. They're just kind of zoning out, following what's going on. Okay, now, here comes Felix again. The cabinet's closed, and, oh, he needs help. Spontaneously, nothing like this. The child hasn't seen anything like he's done anything. And watch a very nice quick point here. They go there, and then we'll get a longer one. They go there with a look to the face, a beautiful look to the face. Okay? And now he puts them away. Okay? Now, here comes the interesting part. This is not exactly communication, but I can't help. I like to share. Okay? So, so he's coming back now. The kid knows the script now. Now this turns into cooperation. It was helping, but now the kid, before he even gets in the picture, he already starts the whole sequence, and he tells him what to do. They go there. Okay? The door closes. He makes sure that it opens, because that's part of it. Okay? Felix puts them away. And it shows understanding of the guy's role, because I'm telling you where to put them, and it illustrates what I would call the cooperative version of imperative pointing. I don't think he's ordering him to put them there. He's telling him, here's where they go. Okay, so anyway, so I'm sorry that I forgot those, but those are to illustrate the second two motives of pointing, that the declarative pointing, which was the showing, and the pointing just when you're looking at something together and you want to share emotion about it, and then the informative pointing was the experiment where he just tells you where the stapler is, and those were, I would call them imperative pointings, although, again, imperative is in these requests, but he's saying they go there, or put them there, or something along in that direction. Okay, so sorry about that. I just forgot that. So now, back to communicative intention. Now we've done with the motives, and we're back to communicative intentions. And I think that this control condition with the watch on the hand is very telling that the children know something is for me or not. And now, the second line under communicative intentions, where did this come from? Well, if you think about it, children are constantly, young infants constantly from very early, have adults wanting them to do things. So the adult's putting on their diaper and they want them to hold still, you know, or they're putting on the shirt and put your arm out, you know, do here, and they grab the arm and put it out so you can put the shirt on or whatever. Or in some traditional cultures, when the child is on the hip and they need to go to the bathroom, the adult holds them out like this so they can go to the bathroom. So the adult is always manipulating the child physically, because the child's not ready to accept a communicative thing yet. They're not cognitively competent enough. So the adult wants them to do things all the time. So children, I think, come to understand at some point, I don't know where, 6 to 9 months or somewhere in there, children understand she intends or she wants me to do something. Right? And that this is for me in the sense that it's directed toward she has intentions toward my actions or intentional states. And so I understand that's not up at communicative intentions, but that's in the direction. That's this behavior is meant for me in the sense that she's trying to get me to do something. And so they learn to do that. They learn through things like eye contact and various other things that this is directed toward me. And so then when they start understanding when they start being able to share intentions in some way and have mutual knowledge of things, the idea is supposed to be that they know that this is supposed to be for my cognitive or intentional benefit, and it's supposed to get me to do something via communication and not via physical moving my arm around. And I know that's a big jump, and I'm waving a magic wand and saying how they get from one to the other, but at least they experience things in that direction for quite a while. And Gergely and Chibra have a whole list of things like eye contact and other kinds of ostensive cues that children are sensitive to from quite early. They're sensitive to eye contact quite early, and as well as a number of other things that basically are cues that this is for you. I have some other things here that are not so compelling. I'm not even going to go over them because they're not that compelling. I will do, there's one other study, however, that at about 14 months, Henrico Moll and I did a study where children know so you play with an object together, and I play with another object together, and then I leave the room, and you and another adult play with the third object. So the child has played with all three objects equally. They're all equally old and boring, equally experienced with them, but I was out of the room for the third one. We shared the first two, and then I was out of the room and I didn't experience the third one, and I come back in and I say, whoa, wow, can you give me that? But I'm pointing to the whole three of them. And 12-month-old children and 14-month-old children know the one that you are ignorant about. They can identify the one that you didn't experience. So there are two things. One is they need to know the general principle. People get excited about new things, not old things, because that explains your excitement. And secondly, they need to know what's new and old for you. And Henrika and I also manipulated some things and found that if all you did was look at the object, look at the first one, or actually manipulate the first one, manipulate the second one, but you didn't share it with them, then you left the room for the third one, then they didn't know what was new for you. They picked randomly. But if you shared the first one and shared the second one and left the room, then they knew what it was. So they register what you know and don't know in situations of sharing before they register what you know and don't know by just observing you observing things. So we think this illustrates that they know what they've shared with other people. If you've actually interacted much with a 9-month-old or something, I had a Philippe Rochat's baby from somewhere between 6 and 9 months of age. Whenever I would go over to their house, we had this little game. She would put her hand up near my mouth, and I would go, whoa, 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 you know, I would gobble up her hand or whatever. So whenever I came over, that's the first thing she would do was put her hand in my mouth. And they said she doesn't do that with anybody else. So she knows what game we play together. And so I think it's not ridiculous to think that they know from sharing activities, they register what you perceived and understood in that situation, and they know that later. And in situations where they're just observing you from the outside doing something, it's just somehow not as salient. We don't have a great explanation for exactly why, but in any case, it's not as salient for them, it's not as meaningful for them when they're just observing you doing something. But when you share it, that's important. I think one possible explanation, a more sort of biological one, evolutionary one, is that what's absolutely critical in human communication and linguistic communication is knowing what we've shared and what we haven't, what's new and old information. So information structure in general, topic and focus, choosing a noun versus a pronoun, all of that is based on what's old information or boring and shared, and what's new and exciting. And so I stress new elements and I de-stress old elements. I choose a pronoun if we share it. I choose a full noun or a noun with a relative clause if we don't share it. All kinds of things that structure the information structure of the sentence and the referential choice of the noun phrase. All of those are determined by me knowing what's old and new for you. And the most important case of that is when we've shared it or haven't shared it. And that's the previous discourse context. What we've been talking about before, we can assume we both share. And then if we haven't talked about it, then it's new. Sometimes I take your perspective and it's not shared, but the shared is the key one. Okay, so finally now, let me come to the characterizing gestures. I didn't talk about those much last time, but I think they're important. And they have not been studied very much. Now, some of you may have heard of baby signs. There's this big baby signs thing in America. And Linda Creedlow and Susan Goodwin started this program where they teach kids, so, you know, this is a bird, and, you know, and this is a fish, okay, or whatever. And they teach them these things, and a lot of kids who are actually late talkers learn these little baby signs before they learn to talk, and they think that's a good thing. But there's been some implication that the kids are using this as an iconic representation of a bird, okay? And this is an iconic representation of a fish. I can't do it very well. But I don't think that for a minute, okay? And the children don't invent these. They imitate the adults doing them. And the fact that this is a fish, there's no way in the world a child is going to invent for themselves that pucking in the cheeks is a fish. I mean, that, you know, the adult does that and the child imitates it. Okay, so these are wonderful symbols. They're a wonderful thing for all kinds of reasons. But the question is, do children invent any iconic signs? And the answer is there's very little evidence. And iconicity in evolutionary, to talk about the evolution of language, iconicity is thought to somehow be easier because the symbol resembles the referent. But the truth is iconicity is hard. And iconicity is hard because whereas pointing has this sort of grounded in space, directing your attention somewhere, this, I've got to do a kind of a mind reading thing. That this is going to remind you of what I want it to remind you of, or this is going to remind you of a tiger, or whatever it might be. And so I think you've got more theory of mindy kinds of things going on in these characterizing gestures. And there aren't any real good studies of children's spontaneous characterizing gestures. The only studies there are these ones that are taught or that kids learn from adults. In the table 2B, I have some that were made by Melinda Carpenter, some observations she has made. The ones with stars beside them are the ones that she taught. So the ones at the very beginning, pre-12 months, are what I would call ritualizations, hands up to be picked up. So these are just ritualizations like chimp gestures, the ones at the very top. Hands up, reaching for giving, putting mom's hands on things, bouncing excitedly to get this bouncing game going again. Then the stars are things that she taught him, various baby signs. Then about 12 to 13 months, he does a couple of things that are a little bit ambiguous. So for example, she washes his hands for him, and he's supposed to put his hands out like this so she can wash them. And then at some point, when he wants his hands washed, he does this. He does this kind of like this to have his hands washed. These are all ambiguous. I'm not really sure how to do that. He does the palms up where. That's presumably conventional. He's presumably imitated that. I assume kids wouldn't make that up. And this is probably not even, I'm sure it's not cross-culturally universal. Brushes his hands together, all gone. That's also presumably imitated. Shaking his head, no. The only one that looks sort of creative and iconic is where he's shaking his head no as he's pretending to bite a balloon. Earlier, he had bitten a balloon, and his mom told him, don't do that. And so the balloon is over on the table, and he kind of looks at it and goes like he's threatening to do it or whatever. Okay, but you can see it's a fairly meager lot. Kids don't just, I gave you the example of me going like this to ask for grated Parmesan cheese at the counter. Kids just don't make up iconic signs. By the way, in children learning American Sign Language or any other sign language, they do not learn the iconic signs earlier than they learn the non-iconic ones. And that's very well established finding. So I'm just, iconicity is not particularly easy, and I think pointing is much more direct and grounded than is the iconic signs. Okay, but now let me show you a little study that we're doing now, because children don't produce them very much, and so I'm still struggling with how to think about them not producing them much. It's very possible the reason they don't produce them so much is because language takes the place, and it might be that in evolution they did use characterizing gestures quite a bit, because they're like imitation in some way, right? The two basic functions, the two basic ways that seem most obvious to me, I don't have any evidence for this, but one of them would be the function of a relative clause. I would say something like, I want the thing that does this. Okay? I want the thing that does, give me the thing. So I'm referring to an object by giving it a characterizing gesture. So in language, that's a noun phrase with, that's a noun with a phrase telling you which one. So I want the one that does that, or I want the chair that does that. And the other one is I'm telling you, no, do it this way. You have to twist it. You have to do it this way. So I'm either telling you what to do, or I'm telling you to get me an object that does something like that. I think those are the two most obvious functions for which you would use a characterizing gesture. And again, that's just intuitive. I don't have any evidence for that. But since children don't produce them, we've looked at them comprehending them. So these are children 2.5. Now this is telling also. This is the one where I'm telling you how to do I'm telling you how to do it, and we can't really get this to work with very young children, like 18-month-olds who are pointing like crazy. 12 and 18-month-olds are pointing like crazy, and we try this to get them to understand an iconic sign, and they don't. They just don't. So this child is 2.5, and she'll struggle with this little toy, and Felicitas will tell her how to do it. It's doing this thing again. Okay, she tells her to twist it, and sure enough, she starts twisting it right away. Okay, so there's a pre-period there where she struggles with it for a while, and then she struggles it. Okay, now, okay, this shows you relevance. Dan, you want a video of relevance? Here's the relevance. Watch what this child does when she tells her the same thing. The child does it in the air, okay? She doesn't know that this is relevant to her trying to open the box. So again, this is part about the characterizing gestures. We think about the iconicity. We think the relevance is given, but for these young children, it's not given. Somehow, the relevance of pointing seems more transparent to them. The relevance of you doing this in the air while they're trying to open the thing, a lot of children get it, but a lot of times they don't. And so what we've actually had to do, and you would like this, is we've had to fine-tune the situation to wait for just the right moment to do it. And when you wait to just the right moment, so you have to wait for them to be on the right part of the object and struggling with it. And then they see the relevance. When you do it before they even start, most of them don't get it. Right? So this is why the iconic gestures are, I think, difficult. I got two more for you here. This is a kid who's very good. So the kid, this thing comes out, this little white thing on the side. The child first spins it, and says it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and then she tells him to pull it, and he pulls it right away, and then it works. Okay? And that's going to open the door in the front. And then here's another kid. This is when you have to spin around. This is, again, a kid doing it in the air. Do it like this. You got to do it around like this. And the kid thinks I'm supposed to do this with my arm. Okay? And then goes back to the thing and has no clue what to do with it. Okay? This was actually a pilot subject. And so what we do is, if they don't get it, then we point to the appropriate part, which is what she's doing now. And then after we point to the appropriate part, then we do this again. Okay? So we don't have any real results on this, but I'm just showing you this, that iconic signs, which on the surface to adults seem like they are the easiest thing in the world, actually are not easy. Children don't produce many of them, and they don't comprehend them very easily either. Okay, so I have a whole other page here, but I knew I wasn't going to get to it. So let me just tell you what's in there very briefly. The last plank of my argument for children having basically the full structure of communicative, of human cooperative communication with these early points is, with some possible exceptions about the communicative intentions, but they have the basic idea of the joint attentional frame, the different layers of motives, the cooperative motives, is that here's the question, why do children start pointing in these ways at the age they do? Why not earlier, why not later? Why just the age they do? That's the developmental question. And that question can help you decide what the constitutive skills are and motivations are. So infants, you may or may not know this, infants actually put their fingers out like this from about 3 months of age. This is well established. Hannon and Fogel and Hannon, they do this all the time, okay? And they walk around like this, okay? And some kids more than others. So they've got the hand shape, okay? They got that 3 months. In terms of functions, kids want adults to do things for them. They have the imperative motive, the requestive motive, like I say, from birth. They're crying and getting adults to do things for them from very early. They also have something of the sharing motive. If you believe Trevarthen, where they just share emotions back and forth, they have the sharing motive. So again, it's the dyadic version and not the triadic version, but okay. So they want adults to help them get things. They like sharing with the adult. They've got the finger point. Why can't they put them together? Why can't they put together the finger point for wanting something? They got, it's something, it's like 6 to 9 months before they do it. Well, the answer is that at around 9 months, we have this 9-month revolution, 9 to 12 months, where children, for the first time, we have independent evidence that they start understanding, and this is in the second thing here where I have answers, understanding goals and intentions, understanding perception and attention, understanding what others know, mutual attention and knowledge, and they understand helping. Okay, so it's all at about 9 to 12 months of age that I would say understanding others as intentional agents and understanding and being able to share intentions with others, these all emerge in the 9 to 12 month period, and sure enough, that's when these pointings emerge. So what I have in the capitals there is this answer provides evidence that early pointing is based on mental states because we have independent evidence of these things from other studies, and it happens to be emerging at the same time when it could have before if you just look superficially at what's required, but it waits for these things to happen and then it happens. So that's at least correlational evidence that these things are involved. I also think it also justifies these primitives of, if you go through study by study, that they understand when you want something, they understand when you're attending to something, they understand when we're enjoying attention together. So the primitives that I've used to analyze it, it also justifies those. So I'll skip the sidebar and just say that another final interesting fact is that we really don't know, if you say how do children actually then, how do these things come together, how do they learn to point to request and all. The truth is we don't know how children learn to point. And we don't even know how much learning is involved. That is to say, you can imagine several scenarios. One of them would be a kind of a ritualization where they point to things for themselves or whatever, and adults react to it and react the right way, and it gets socialized. That was Vygotsky's sort of idea, that I do it non-communicatively and it gets socialized by adult reactions. You can imagine me imitating adults doing it. Okay? You could imagine that I point spontaneously, innately, or whatever, and that gets socialized. You can imagine a lot. And the answer is we don't have a single study that addresses this. So we don't know whether kids learn to point by imitation or by some other means. So we actually are working on a little bit of that now indirectly, where we're doing correlational things of do mothers who point a lot have kids who point a lot, but it's all indirect. It's not very good. What we'd like to, if we didn't have any ethics, we could answer it quite easily. You know, we would have some mothers not point for their children and other mothers point more for their children and things. But we thought maybe the ethics committee, of which I'm chairman, wouldn't approve it. So, so anyway, it's an interesting. And the origins of the characterizing gestures are unknown as well. And I guess for me, the central question is the degree to which imitation is involved. Are they imitating pointing, or is something else happening? And I think it's possible that the very early points are kind of ritualized or socialized, and that the later ones are imitated. I think it's possible they ritualize the early ones and later discover he's doing the same thing I am and they're imitating. So it's everything's open, and we don't really know that. Okay, so to conclude, early gestures have the full structure of human cooperative communication before language, based on mental states, intention, attention, knowledge, not beliefs, knowledge of the connaître, not savoir variety, perspective, absent reference, based on shared intentionality, joint intentions, joint attention, joint knowledge of the connaître, not savoir variety, motives of helping and sharing, including informing. They don't do concealed authorship, deception, and all those sorts of things. That comes later, but I still think that they have at least some of the basics of the communicative intentions. How they learn and acquire them, we don't know. And I'm going to try to go next time from this and try to take these basic elements and move into language and linguistic communication, which was not what the published abstracts say. I decided to do language sort of at the last minute. But we'll try to get from here to language next time. Thank you.
Great work, and thanks for this lecture. I think you must have already had this objection I'm going to put you, but sorry, I would like to know your response. In the information case, in the information pointing case,
yep.
Informative pointing.
Informative pointing.
The fact that the baby is pointing to a missing object doesn't seem to entail that he realized that you don't know where the object is. He might simply form the notion that in order to complete the goal, you have to use that object.
Were you the reviewer? Okay.
We found a similar problem when we worked on simulation theory of, and simulationists also, when they have a simple view, they can't account for the fact that someone doesn't have a certain knowledge. I mean, that's a basic problem for us philosophers. So.
Yeah. All I can say is that in this, we went round and around for weeks, months, trying to come up with something a little better. The problem is in this informative pointing has included in it that you need it, that you have some need. So what we even had a case where one object fell down by itself and I watched it fall down, and the other one fell down while I wasn't looking. okay? And then I need something, all right? And now they pointed to the one that I didn't know where it was, okay? And I didn't touch either one of them. I didn't use either one of them. But Melinda Carpenter, Melinda is our deflationary swordsman who just goes into the heart of things, and I'm the enthusiastic one who says, that's great, that'll work. And she says, no, wait a minute. Okay? Her argument was that if I look at it but don't choose it, then I'm implicitly rejecting it. And so it's not just that I don't know where that one is and I know where that one is. I know where that one is, and if I didn't choose it, then it means I don't want it. And so the interpretation doesn't go based on your knowledge that I'm ignorant. It's that I don't want that one, and that one, then it leaves that one, which I haven't looked at. And after some weeks and months of beating our heads against the wall, we decided that that was inherent in informative pointing, and there was no way that we could get around it. And it is possible, however, in declarative pointing, where they just want to share something with you, and they don't have a need, that you might be able to design something where it would be different depending on whether you had noticed it yet or not. So they point when you haven't noticed it yet, and not when you do. But again, because this sort of expressive declarative pointing has this additional component that they want to share the emotion with you, and even once you've seen it, they still want to share the emotion with you, that's not a great candidate either. So all I can say is we're still thinking about it. We have things that have been sitting on the back burner for a while that suddenly we get some insight on. And the studies we've done are the best we can do at this point, and I realize that. But let me. Sorry, I have one other answer to that. The other answer to that is we now have several studies of the type that I told you about that are not about communicative pointing, but about when the adult leaves the room and comes back in, and they know which object the adult has not experienced. Okay? And we have 3 different studies, and there's another lab that's done one as well. And so this is not about communicative pointing directly, but it does show that they understand when someone is familiar with or knows an object, and when they don't know another one, and they can pick out of an array the one they don't know. That, to me, lends plausibility from an oblique angle. It lends plausibility to the notion that when they're informative pointing, they know you're ignorant. But it's definitely not on informative pointing directly.
Is it my turn? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So you repeatedly insisted that all this starts before language, and so I don't know the plot yet, but it's important for you that it takes place before. But my question is very basic. So there is a sense in which it's not really before language as far as understanding is concerned. I mean, I suppose that a 9-month child already understands quite a bit. And second, even on the production side, I mean, it's inherently obvious that language must develop before it starts being used on the production side. And so you could, I mean, in principle, it could also be argued that this is the first stage in which we see language production.
What I'll concede to you is that they come together, okay? But I don't think it's language first. Comprehension is a very difficult problem to know when the child really comprehends something. So Pavlov's dog knows that when the bell rings, the food's coming. All right? And children know when they hear the word cup, they associate that with a cup. But an association of what we call a word, a sound, with an experience repeatedly is not a linguistic symbol. It's not. So I don't know what 9-month-old infants understand. There are experiments showing that if you say cup, they look toward a picture of a cup and not toward a picture of a dog. But I'll bet you I could get, speaking of a dog, I'll bet you I could get a dog with a little bit of training to look at the picture of a cup rather than the picture of a dog to the sound cup. And in fact, we have a dog in Germany who has a 200-word vocabulary, okay? Whose owner has taught him 200 words, and this dog has been tested in rigorous conditions and has a 200-word vocabulary. Are those linguistic symbols? Are they associations? What are they? I don't know. So when you say infants' comprehension starts, and dolphins, by the way, as well, and chimpanzees, of course, too. When you say their language starts in comprehension before, I don't know what that, I'm not objecting, I'm just saying we're not so sure about comprehension. If you're talking about production, children produce, mama or whatever. There's a very hard line. It's very difficult to tell when they really start producing. But if you have a fairly stringent criterion that they need to produce a word in a little bit of flexibility, like different reference, not the same one every time, not saying mama to mama and then turning to the camera and saying mama and turning to the chair and saying mama. It has to be consistent for a referent, for different reference of the same kind and whatever. The age that's most accepted in production, flexible production, is about 14 months.
I mean, first, you could, and even with comprehension, sometimes if you take a relatively abstract concept like clean, for instance,
like what?
Like something that is clean as
clean.
opposed to
Okay.
dirty, right?
Yes.
It's not really a physical characteristic. It's not the same for a hand to be clean and for a table and so.
Right.
You could imagine that you could have quite clear evidence that the concept of cleanness is present. I don't know if this is the case, but you can imagine.
Well, if you take those kinds of verbs, change of state verbs, things like clean, or even things like cut. So it's a different thing for the hair to be cut and the grass to be cut. And you use different instruments and all that sort of thing. The age at which children are using those change of state verbs are generally 20, 22 months. And the early stuff tends to be holophrastic, either object labels, sometimes actions, like dancing or some kind of whatever, and those kinds of things. But these change of state verbs used for different actions that have the same causal structure, 20, 22 months. So that's still quite a ways away in terms of production now. Right?
But isn't it plausible that before we see production of this, there must be
yes.
comprehension?
Yes.
I just mean maybe they do in fact understand quite a lot, and maybe they have quite
so
an algorithm.
I agree with you, and in general terms that I probably shouldn't be so confident when I say before language, because it's hard to say when language doesn't start, on one day. So it's hard to say exactly when. But I will grant that it might be all happening together, but I don't think language is leading the show. I don't think there's any evidence that language is leading the show.
So it's about, first of all, about how specific this phenomenon is the pointing gesture. So first of all, I was wondering, there are different ways. I was wondering if you know anything about populations that can't point for children who have a paralysis.
A really good question. So since we can't be unethical and have our mothers raised without pointing, what we can do is look for natural experiments cross-culturally. And Ulf Lefkowski, in collaboration with Steve Levinson and the Nijmegen group, is starting to do that. There are, by most cultures that we know about, if not all, do some kind of indicating. Yeah. But they do it in very different ways. So quite common is chin pointing and lip pointing, for example. But there have been a couple of cultures now that we've looked at informally. So these are linguistic field workers, and we ask them, what do the parents do? And so we're just getting back little ethnographic reports and not even so systematic. But in at least 2 places, the adults only lip point or chin point, but actually nobody had sort of noticed this before. They actually point like this for their kids. Mm-hmm. So that's one possibility. But what we'd really like is a culture where the parents don't finger point for the kids and see what the kids do. And we're searching for the right culture now.
So what about the following things? You can sort of manipulate children in our culture. First of all, the experimenter can use novel ways of pointing, like using a laser pointer or putting a stick in his mouth. I don't know, whatever you want.
We thought of the laser pointer. That's a great one.
But you haven't done it yet.
No, we haven't.
What would you predict?
That's a good. I don't know. Would that be unethical? Do we have any parents? Would that be unethical for us to ask you to point for your child like this, which is what some cultures do? This, for example, or point for your child like this. How about some chin pointing? No.
Or a laser pointer,
or
a stick even.
No, that's
between your teeth, whatever.
But it's a very good suggestion because that would pick up imitation to some degree. If the kids who had their parents pointing with their elbows instead of with their finger, that would be pretty convincing. But no, we haven't done that. And again, there are these ethical issues. I don't really know. The best you could do in a training study, I think, is to encourage some moms to point extra for their kids, and would this somehow encourage it? But that'd be very weak.
What would you predict? Would it be very easy for kids who've never seen somebody use a laser pointer before to know that you're pointing to the thing, and for all these three types.
Well, we had one little child of a student in there, and we played around with the laser pointer a little bit. But the 12-month-old was just excited, like the laser pointer, and we couldn't get him to get the idea that you're indicating something with the laser pointer. That was just too. That was a little too abstract. So.
Now, what about making it hard for them?
We thought about a flashlight too, in the dark, and they turn a flashlight on things. But we thought 12-month-old turn out the lights in the lab. We thought maybe that might not be a good idea either.
Yeah. Well, what about having them hold something so they can't point with their hands? So they invent some other gesture.
I was interested in the characterizing gestures and how we could induce them to see if we could invent them. So we wanted a situation where pointing would not be diagnostic because of various things, and you can't talk. So we call that the sock in the mouth experiment, which also the ethics committee doesn't like, which is you can't let them talk and you can't let them point. So we're not doing any of these, okay? I'm just saying we thought about them. And so the same way I think would be there if you could keep them from pointing with their hands. One thing. What we thought about for the not pointing with your hands was, like when you sit in a barber or the coiffure or whatever it is. Okay, they put the thing around like this. Put one of those around the kids so they couldn't point. But holding something and they need to point. Okay, that's possible. But anyway, we haven't done any of this. Sorry, but it's yeah.
Well, can I ask one last thing? Because I think I missed something in a moment of inattention. You say no pointing for greeting, thanking, apologizing. I mean, it occurred to me that that's the thing you always have to keep reminding kids to do until they're quite old.
No,
say thank you, say hello, and things like that.
I know. All I was doing there was just trying to recognize that there are other motives other than helping and sharing, but that helping and sharing are what we're doing most of the time, and then I call these specialty motives. And the specialty motives, but I think for each of those sort of specialty motives, apologizing and greeting and thanking as being the sort of primary ones that kids do quite early, I don't know how they understand them, but you can give a quite nice little evolutionary explanation of why we need to thank people, why we need to say we're sorry, and why we need to greet them in a nice little thing. And so what I really want to do is to say, take each of these functions and say you need to give a little evolutionary explanation for why this function has evolved with a balance between communicator and audience and why it works in each case separately, not to just say some adaptive thing about sharing information is useful, but to actually talk about each function separately.
My question is about the triadic relation which is involved in pointing.
Yeah.
It seems to me naively that in the case of pointing to novelty, triadic relation is much simpler than pointing to help, as in the case of the sonar experiment.
Yeah.
And so first, I don't know if they appear at the same time or if the second one appear later.
Yeah.
But my question is about evolution. Some years ago, you considered that this kind of triadic relation was very difficult to evolve, and that could explain the divide between chimps and us. And I'm not sure that you still stick to this idea, because in the case of pointing to novelty, it seems to be, the bootstrapping of it seems to be very trivial, because it could start with a mere reflex, just point to novelty. And triadic relation could came afterwards. So my question is, two questions. Do they appear at the same time in children? And you still think that it's difficult to evolve?
The informative pointing is something that I think kids don't have much opportunity to do in their everyday life, to just inform you of something you don't know. I don't think 12-month-olds, that occasion doesn't arise very often. And so I don't think they do it very much naturally. But in the lab, we created these situations, and all of a sudden they did it. So I think it's possible that we have some children who had never done it before in their lives until they were in our lab. But they understand about helping in some sense, and they understand about information in some sense. So I would say in our experiments, they emerge at the same age, but I think they're of orders of magnitude difference in terms of usefulness and frequency. So the informing, pointing, I can imagine occurring infrequently or almost never. And in certain cultures where kids are ignored more than they are in our culture, I can imagine informative pointing never happening until much later. So, but they seem to have the requisite skills in the laboratory. Now, triadic thing evolving. Well, the reason I don't trumpet the triadic as much as I used to is because these chimps raised by humans learn to do triadic things in the imperative mode. So when Kanzi wants to go out the door, he points out the door like this and references you. And when Kanzi wants an object, he points to it, or these other chimps that I told you about, 60% of the chimps at Yerkes who indicate what they want, and then they look at you to see if you're going to get it for them. So, and chimps in the wild do a little bit, this kind of holding out the shoulder like this that I showed you or whatever. I don't know, triadic, I don't know, but young chimps when they've got something that another chimp wants, and they can initiate play by kind of, it's not exactly a tease, but they kind of like this, and then when you come for it, they pull it away. So I think there are some kind of low-level imperative things going on in a triadic mode that chimps do a little bit of. And again, like Kanzi knows you control his world, and he knows that indicating where he wants to go or what he wants to you in some way helps him get what he wants. So it's all in the imperative mode. By the way, there's a recent analysis of Washoe's signing that's the most systematic one to date. And if you take out the unclear cases, over 95% of everything he does is imperatives, and I would say 100%, but there is the unclear cases, and the same with a previous analysis of Kanzi. So what all these language learning apes are doing is imperatives. They're getting people to do things. Okay, so what the shared intentionality, the focus on shared intentionality, includes in it the triadic, but it's much more about our motivation to share and to have a shared goal, and the shared goal is triadic, and the shared attention is triadic, and the motivation to help and to share is triadic. So, so I would say that maybe you get the beginnings of triadicness in some of the apes in the imperative mode, or in certain limited situations. It's a little bit there. And when you get the sort of shared intentionality with shared goals, shared attention, etc., then it really blooms out. So that's why I don't insist on it as a kind of a dividing line the way I used to.
Okay, we have Roberto, then Dan, then Pierre. So perhaps short questions if you want to start.
So when you presented the movie with the baby who's lifting the object and somehow presented.
Oh, good. You have an alternative hypothesis.
So no. The question is, you said, well, it's very hard to think of this as not being a sharing gesture.
Yeah.
You said, what else could it be? And maybe one should ask which kind of alternative interpretation is available. So I had more of a theoretical curiosity. What do you frame in terms of alternative hypothesis here? Because you might have a very deflationary hypothesis. The baby has a rule according to which every time there is an adult next to you and there is an object in front of you, lift the object 15 inches in front of the nose of the adult, or something like that, which is of course silly.
Sounds like Danny Povinelli criticizing our ape experiments, yeah.
I didn't want to mention that name, but that is of course somehow the idea.
Yeah.
And what are the options here, according to you? If you really were forced to reject the intentional hypothesis here and find for an alternative hypothesis, what would be your best candidate?
This is sort of a long methodological discussion. What happens is, what is proposed, you have a phenomenon, an experiment, and most of these have been the chimp experiments that Povinelli has criticized. But and what you do is, what the behaviorist or Povinelli does is think up a possible learning history that might possibly have been there, with no evidence that it actually was there. No evidence, just it's possible. And then the burden is on us to show that learning history was not there.
Right, I think I have a simpler question
Okay.
than this big methodological issue. If you had the necessity of framing an alternative hypothesis, just to make it understand why this intentional hypothesis is so good
Well,
and bad, what the best candidate would be?
Well, I mean, you know, the best candidate is that the kid wants you to do something. He wants you to open it or wants you to do something with it, or because, you know, the sort of imperative motive, I mean, this, you know, as I said, from birth, kids are crying and they're needing stuff and they're wanting stuff, and you have to help them and you have to give them stuff, you have to reach stuff for them they can't reach, you have to give them what they're going to eat, so they need, so the most normal alternative hypothesis is they want you to do something. They want you to do something with that object. But that certainly doesn't seem the way at all. And in fact, Luigi Cagnoni had an operationalization of showing, which she actually coded on the tape, the elbow, the bend in the elbow. So when you're giving, or even offering, you're doing this, and when you're showing, you're doing this. And you know, I don't know about that operationalization, but again, this seems to show that it's not stuffing it in their hand and wanting them to do something with it, because the same child, you can show that when they give it or offer it, they're out like this, and when they're showing it, they're doing this. The emotion is typically different as well. When you're giving it and you want something, it's typically a straightforward emotional face, and the sharing, you saw that little kid, he's doing this big grin and stuff. So that's, I actually am serious when I said it's hard to think of what another hypothesis might be, but the most obvious one would be that they want something concrete, and I just don't think that holds. And of course, when it matches our adult intuitions or our adult experience, that always helps. And we know how much we like to share. I mean, you know, do I want to go walk through the Louvre all day alone? No, that's a little bit on the boring side. But if I have a friend going with me, it's a great experience. So, I mean, I like sharing, and so does, and you know, I mean, that's what, well, academics are special. We like getting up here and talking to people and sharing what we've been doing. I mean, what else have I been doing here except sharing the research we've been doing and the thinking I've been doing? So when it fits your intuitions that this is an adult motive as well, then that helps. It's not obviously not an argument, but it helps as well.
Dan?
Well, there are two populations that might be relevant for two issues which were raised, and I would just want to know if there are relevant data. One, if one wanted to investigate the possibility that there's some innate basis to pointing, one might want to look at blind infants and see if there's any kind of behavior that looks like a more or less aborted form of pointing. The issue regarding the relationship with language, which Benjamin raised earlier on, obviously an important issue. One would look at deaf-mute children, even though, of course, many now are trained very early on in sign language. At least there should be anecdotal evidence about pointing in deaf-mute children who are not so trained, or those you can even experimentally study when they're just beginning to be trained and so on and so on in deaf-mute language.
Very interesting. I mean, the deaf-mute is very seldom diagnosed before a year, and so that's hard. But it can be. It's sometimes.
No, but you might have children who have just been diagnosed, who have had no training, and you could test them, if you could test them then.
And to my knowledge, there's nothing like that. Blind children, I have seen some sort of anecdotal things of them doing, but I've never actually seen a systematic study. But that's something that there are a fair number of studies with blind children, and I hadn't. That seems obvious, and I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't really thought about looking at that. But I don't know the answer to that. I just don't know.
Pierre?
Just briefly, when you mention the experiment where the child is not, it's not sufficient to satisfy the child's expectation that you identify a standard referent, but in addition, he expects you or she expects you to share emotion.
When it's declarative, expressive pointing, not when it's a request, obviously.
No, informative, let's say. Informative.
Well, I'm calling that expressive, declarative, yes.
Okay. Now, what about the fact that the child might want you to know that he knows, simply? I mean, not that so much he is eager for you to share some kind of emotion, but just he wants to point out, he wants you to know that he knows something that you don't, right? So that would be very simple, right?
That's a very interesting issue, and it works with language as well. So I'll give it to you in the context of Kanzi. So Sue Savage-Rumbaugh claims sometimes that Kanzi uses his language declaratively and not imperatively. And the reason is because he doesn't seem to want anything. So she even talks about a case where something, I don't know what it was, an umbrella or something came on the TV screen, and he points to umbrella. Okay? And my interpretation is yours. He says, I know what that is. Okay? It's a recognition. I know what that is. That's one of those. Right? And I think that's a really, and children do that. Piaget talks about recognitory gestures. Children will see, like they'll see a comb on the shelf, and they'll kind of go like this, or a cup, and the anticipatory movements, recognitory gestures. And I think naming something, when you recognize it, it's categorizing it, it's identifying it, it's doing something. And that's not talked about very much, but I think that's it's very possible that they do that. Kids, for example, we have kids who point. Here's a good thing about the social part. Kids do point when they're alone. There's a woman named Delgado in Spain. It's not published yet, but she's presented at a couple of conferences. And she has kids, and she puts them in a room all by themselves, and things start happening, and they orient themselves, and they point like this for themselves sometimes. And we know that kids talk to themselves in some kind of play, not just the 4-year-olds like the Vygotsky, but like the crib talk, where they're talking to themselves in the crib at 2 and whatnot. So there are a number of things going on like that partially might be play, and partially might be this thing like an act of recognition. I know what that is, or that's interesting, or that's cool. That might be, the recognitory to me is in the direction of non-social. It doesn't have to be non-social, but it's my apprehension of this into a category or into a thing that's interesting or whatever. And yes, I think that is in there somewhere. And as Jean-Louis was saying about the declarative gesture, that's a very likely starting point for these expressive declaratives. Is that's exciting for me all by myself, and then I see that you look at it and get excited too. And either evolutionarily or ontogenetically, that could easily be a beginning point. Is I do it. So I could imagine, if you're thinking about innate bases, and we're talking about, I guess the sort of modern view of a lot of people is there might be a lot of things where just some little skeletal part is wired in, and then there's all this learning that elaborates on top of it. If you wanted to press me on that with pointing, I don't know which part might be kind of wired in, but the orienting response of, oh, okay, that would be the best candidate. Would be that I get excited, and when I orient, I do this, and that would be the best candidate for me.
The idea that I want to be singled out as a source, as a potential source of information. You don't think that's
Okay, sorry, I didn't quite understand that actually. I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about just you wanted recognizing for yourself. No, but okay, that would be. So we've talked about hiding authorship, and then Ulf has talked about cases where we would be emphasizing authorship. And there's actually one example here that in some cases, and this would be going in the direction again of the kind of Gricean and Sperber and Wilson analysis, would be that in some cases when we did this declarative pointing in the experiments, the kid would point and the adult would fully share, and the child would keep pointing. And Ulf's interpretation is that something like, he knows the adult looked at it and got it, but he didn't know that I wanted you to know about it, okay? That somehow they didn't get the part that they're doing it, but they're not. You're doing it, but you're not doing it for the right reason. Okay? The reason is because I wanted you to, and if you're doing it because you wanted to, then that's not good enough. I wanted you to because I wanted you to. So
could you imagine an experiment that actually singles out the contribution of that?
I could imagine imagining one, but I can't imagine it at this moment. No, but that's actually the fact that I can imagine imagining one is actually something, because that means my intuitions say this could be done, but I don't have anything off the top of my head.